Okay, so today I thought we'd do something a little bit different. Let's go over all the gear that I really wish I would have bought sooner. Let's do it. Hey everyone, I'm Cole Caparoon. Thank you for stopping by for another video. Now this is really just gear that I slept on, that it was commonly known about, that had been out for a while, and I just overlooked it, and I wish that I wouldn't have overlooked it. Now it's important to note that none of the companies that I'm going to talk about, none of the gear companies that I'm going to talk about are sponsoring this video. This video is sponsored by Sweetwater. We'll talk about that later. But a bunch of this gear I actually bought myself. And then I think at the end of the video, I want to talk about the specific pieces of gear that I was lucky enough to come on to real early in my career that I'm really glad that I did. So we'll touch on that in a little bit. Okay, let's take a look at some gear. Okay, first up, Auratone 5Cs. These have obviously been out forever. They came out in like the 70s, and I slept on these for a really, really long time until I started grasping the importance of mixing the mid-range, of getting the mid-range right. And ever since then, I need these. I've used them on every single mix and every single master since the day that I got them, and they help me so much solidify the mid-range and make sure that my mixes translate to every system. And so I slept on these for a long time. First, I got NS10s. That was my first forte into this kind of mid-range thing. I got NS10s, and those took my mixes up a whole notch. And then I picked up some Auratones, and those took my mixes up another notch. And now, like the focals that I use in here and the big ones, they all have this focus mode that kind of do the NS10 sort of thing. So between these monitors with their focus mode and the Auratones, I need that. And I slept on it for a really, really long time. I wish I would have got these many years before I did. Okay, next up, Isoacoustics pucks. They're under here. Hopefully that you can see these under here. I've done full videos on this. I'll try to link as many videos below as I can. I've done dedicated videos on a lot of this stuff. But the Isoacoustics pucks, decoupling your speakers from your desk or from your stands. And now I did a whole video on comparing the sound of speaker stands. And so we put on paper like real measurements that the Isoacoustics pucks, like what a huge difference they make. They make a huge difference scientifically and audibly. The stereo image is cleaner, the low end is tighter and more accurate. Just everything feels like you're hearing less of the desk in the room and the speaker and more of you're hearing what's actually happening in the music. And they're super affordable. I'll put links to all of this stuff down below. But Isoacoustics pucks, I think everyone who mixes music should have them. Cannot recommend them enough. Next up, real acoustic treatment. I know this is a little bit of a cliche one, but for many, many years in my early career, I just used like some cheap, crappy foam that I stuck to the walls and thought it did a good job because, you know, it kind of took away some of the slap or some of the echo. But what I didn't realize is that with non-broadband absorption, you are only absorbing down to the like lower mid frequencies, or even with the foam down to the mid-range frequencies. And so what you're left with is a room that's boxy and boomy and doesn't sound natural at all. I spent the first 6 or 7 years of my career not having real acoustic treatment, and that's something that I really wish someone would have told me how important it was earlier in my career. Broadband acoustic treatment, real acoustic treatment, super, super important. Now about 14 or 15 years ago, I had a band come in with a bunch of analog synthesizers. And it was the first time I had spent much time with them, and I was totally blown away by it. Now, virtual instruments were obviously not nearly as good back then, but the real analog synthesizer thing was just a different thing. And so I always wanted one. However, one of the things that I didn't realize is that one of the things that I did all the time was I would always use an arpeggiator on my synthesizers in my virtual instruments. And I always wanted them to be locked to the grid in Pro Tools. Because I was always using this like I was always using that sort of sound, like a lot. Probably too much if I'm being honest. And I needed that locked to the grid in Pro Tools. and I couldn't find any information out there about how to lock the arpeggiator on a hardware synthesizer, on an analog synthesizer, to the grid in Pro Tools. Now I know a bunch of them do it, but I didn't know that at the time, and it wasn't very clearly explained online in any videos or any forums for someone who's not into analog hardware synths. So I did a session at my buddy Gabe's house, and he had one of these Moog Subsequent 37s, and I told him, man, I really want something like that. I need it to lock to the grid in Pro Tools. And he's like, well, this one does that, and it's super easy. It does it over USB, but it's a full analog synthesizer. And I was just mind blown because I had been looking for stuff like that, couldn't really find anything out about it. I wish that, not just about this particular synthesizer, even though I'm infatuated with this, but I wish that I would have known that sooner, that was not actually that difficult to do. So I picked one of these Moogs up, and I did a whole video on it. I'll try to link it down below as well. I did a whole video on this synthesizer, and I go over in that video how easy it is to lock to the grid in your DAW. And that was just such a game changer to have that, the low end and the low mids in these analog synthesizers. It's just a different thing than the virtual instruments. And I really wish that I would have figured that out sooner, and I wish that I would have invested in an analog synth sooner, because this thing is on nearly every song I work on now. Okay, now I realize that a lot of this stuff is not inexpensive, but that's not the point of this video. The point of this video is the things I wish I would have taken more seriously earlier in my career, that I would have sacrificed to invest in earlier in my career. Things that I missed the boat on. This is one of them. 1176. Now, we all know how famous the 1176 is. It's probably the single most famous compressor in history. However, I didn't realize how much of a game changer the hardware was going to be over the software. I'm not trying to make this a hardware versus software debate, but when I finally got a real one, I was blown away, because I used to use 1176 plugins on everything. Now, I had some other very high-end compressors. I bought my Tube Tech long before I got an 1176, like a decade before I got an 1176. So it's not that I wasn't investing in high-end compressors, it's that I underestimated how much better this was than the software, in my opinion. And I wish I would have taken it more seriously earlier in my career, because the hardware 1176 is crazy good. Next up, the Fender Deluxe Reverb. I've always known that this was like a holy grail amp, that this was an amp that like has been on more records than any other amp in history. However, I just never pulled the trigger on one. Now, this particular one is a hand-wired Deluxe. It's the 64 custom hand-wired, and it is one of my favorite amps I've ever had. It's wound up on nearly every song since I got it. And, you know, I knew that it was a holy grail type amp. I knew it was one of the most recorded amps in history. I didn't expect to love it as much as I do, and I wish, you know, I've had lots of other amps, lots of other very expensive amps for many years, and I wish that I would have just sacrificed and like went with one of these sooner, because man, is it absolutely incredible. While we're on the topic of guitars, I wish that I would have pulled the trigger on a hollow body a little sooner. This is, and doesn't have to be this one, any hollow body. I have lots of electric guitars, I have lots of acoustic guitars, but the hollow body thing is not something that I had ever picked up until I got this one. So this is a PRS SE hollow body, and it's fantastic. Like it's beautiful, it plays great, it sounds really great. In the grand scheme of guitars, it is pretty affordable. I can't remember how much these are. I think they're somewhere around $1,000. If I'm wrong, I'll put it somewhere up here. And I'll link this down. I'll link all this stuff down below. But the hollow body is just a different thing, and I overlooked it for way too many years. It is a valuable tool in the arsenal. If you already have some solid bodies that you like, and you already have some acoustics that you like, get you a hollow body, because it's a different, unique thing. And I wish I would have got one sooner. Okay, next up, the Lawton Audio Atlantis. I slept on this for so long, and I always saw these, and I was like, I wonder what those sound like. And then I finally got one into demo, and this is hands down one of my favorite microphones, And in addition to it being one of my favorite microphones, it's also one of the most affordable microphones I have. It comes in at $1,750, I believe. I'll link it down below. Banger of a microphone. It's so good, and it is so versatile. So you've got different polar patterns here. You've got figure eight, cardioid, and omni. And then on the other side here, you have got a pad, a built-in pad. And then on the back, there's another switch that is like different character switches. It's gentle, forward, and neutral, I believe. And it makes it hands down my best pick for a vocal mic, or really an instrument mic, under $2,000. It's so good, and I slept on it for so long. Check one of these out if you're in the market for like a do-it-all microphone for any genre or any style. I cannot recommend that enough. Now, while we're on the topic of microphones, good mic stands. This Ultimate Support mic stand here, it's got a weighted base on wheels and a counterweight back there. It goes super high. It comes with a extra swivel right there if you use it. I don't ever use it, but if you're using it for overheads or for instrument mics, it'd be great. But I think these are like $250. I think I'll link it down below. But like, this is just such a good rock solid stand for like heavier microphones or overheads if you're doing drums or whatever. I just used crappy stands forever, and I should have picked one of these up a long time ago. Now, honorable mention for gear I wish I would have gotten a long time ago, the flock patch. Now, slight disclaimer, it's an honorable mention because it's a lot of money, especially for a patch bay. And so while it has been an absolute game changer for me, I probably just wouldn't have ever wanted to invest that kind of money years ago. Now I'm really glad I did. I wish I would have, 3 or 4 years ago when I started getting really serious about hardware. And but the flock patch bay has been an absolute game changer. It's worth every penny. So let's talk about a couple things that I'm really glad that I came onto early that a lot of other people weren't doing. Now, the first one, and the biggest, most standout one to me, is mixing through a pair of hardware mic preamps. Now, I have my own signature pair of mic preamps. I have a whole video on that. I'll link it down below. These are on my mix bus for every single song, and honestly, about half the masters that I do get passed through them as well. It's a total game changer. The reason why I came up with this is because, this is probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago. Hardware summing was becoming such a, everyone was talking about a summing box. You got to have a summing box. Analog summing, it's way better than summing in the box in your DAW. And it's just that's what everyone could talk about. And I was thinking about it a whole bunch, and no one told me this, at least I don't believe anyone did. I just didn't believe that to me, hardware summing, this is going to get a little nerdy. Side note, this is not just about gears, a little bit of philosophy for you. In my mind, summing, the act of summing tracks together, is two parts. There's like the literal act of summing the tracks together. So your kick drum and your snare drum and your bass guitar and your acoustic guitar and your synthesizer and your vocal harmony. There's the physical act of those combining into a left and right stereo track. So that's one part of summing. But then in these summing boxes, in these hardware units that everyone was losing their mind about, there's also all of the circuitry, the wires, the resistors, the transistors, the transformers, whatever all is in that box, and every one of them is a little bit different, that is also influencing the sound as much, or in my opinion, way more than the act of just putting the tracks together, than the literal act of summing. And so in my mind, I didn't want to buy more interfaces with more I/O and a whole bunch more snakes and a summing box. I just didn't feel like that was going to get me. So I'm like, how do I get 90, 95, 99% of what these people are talking about in summing boxes, analog hardware summing boxes, without investing in all of that money? And so I started experimenting with putting some mic preamps on my mix bus. Now, it just started with, I had a console at the time. It just started with running my actual mix bus out to a pair of tracks and then right back in. So I had some analog color. It ran through the preamps, through the EQs, through the faders, and then back in. Now, I didn't use my console at the time for mixing necessarily. I didn't sum everything all at once. I used that console as a bunch of individual hardware inserts, and so I basically had channel strips on a bunch of different tracks in Pro Tools. So I just ran it through some of those channel strips, and I was like, this is a thing. And so I started experimenting with different stuff, and the first preamps that I landed on that I was mixing through was a Vintech 273. It's a 1073 style mic pre. It's a stereo mic pre. I think it had like a high and a low EQ on it maybe. And it was super solid for the money, and that was a real game changer. It got rid of so much digital harshness just strapping that across my mix bus, and that became a massive part of my sound moving forward. Now, I've experimented with a whole bunch of different preamps at this point, and have landed on these that are my signature preamps. They're a game changer. They really are. And I'll link down below to that video as well. So I'm really glad. That was like a kind of accidental kind of thing. I was trying to solve a problem, and no one was really saying anything about it, talking about doing this. And I'm really glad I came onto that. The other thing that is a real standout to me way back in the day is I picked up, and you guys have heard me talk about it on this channel before, I picked up my TubeTech LCA2B compressor. And I think to date, that is still the best compressor that has ever been made. They are not cheap. They're $5,000 or $6,000 new for one, and it's a stereo 2-channel compressor. I have tracked almost every vocal through that since the day that I got it. It lived on my drum bus absolutely forever. I used to track bass guitar through it and acoustic guitar through it, and I mean, just it is truly the most transparent hardware compressor I've ever used, and I don't hear anyone talk about them. Everyone talks about the CL1B. No one talks about the LCA2B, and it is a literal game changer. And I just kind of stumbled upon it when I was looking for my holy grail drum bus compressor 12 or 14 years ago, and I picked one up. Bought it from Frank Filippetti, actually, and it was apparently on his mix bus for years, and he had mixed like Elton John and Barbra Streisand and James Taylor and all this crazy stuff through it, I guess. And so I believe it has a little bit of mojo in it as well. But it was something that no one was talking about, still no one talks about. It is an absolute world-class game-changer compressor. So I'll link that down below if you just want to go take a look at it as well. I think that probably does it, but I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this got your wheels turning. This was interesting to watch. I'll put links down below for everything. Those links go to Sweetwater. Anytime you guys need any piece of musical gear, not just the stuff in this video, you can jump on any one of my videos and pick up anything that you need once you've clicked on one of those links. And it doesn't cost you anything extra, but it goes a long ways to help support this channel and help me keep making videos. So I really appreciate it when you guys use those links anytime you need to purchase anything. And thank you to Sweetwater for sponsoring this video. And I guess that'll do it. I have dedicated videos for a lot of this stuff. If I didn't link them down below, just search for it. If I don't have a dedicated video on something I talked about in this video, and you want a dedicated video on it, let me know down below. Drop a comment. Thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you. We'll see you in the next one. Peace.